Described those distribution points. The Gaza Humanitarian Foundation, Palestinians are starving, and this is the only way they could get food. And sometimes most of them come back being killed or injured. Hind al-Khudari, AlJazeera, Dar al-Balah, Gaza, Palestine.
That is all from me for now. Louisa Pilbeam. You can find more information on our website, AlJazeera.com. Weather is up next. Then Inside Story will examine the role of Russia, China and Turkey in the conflict between Iran and Israel. Stay with us for that.
Hello, those monsoon rains are really picking up and down the west coast of India. Good to see you, especially for southern India, where in Mangaluru there has been some flooding in Karnataka state, and still more rain will be falling over top of that area, pretty much from Gujarat right down to Kerala state. And this all pushes into that western side of Myanmar, so heavy falls of rain for its capital, Yangon. All of that pushes into Indochina, where there has been some flooding there. And we did have a tropical storm around the South China Sea spinning around. It's injected a lot of moisture into southern China, so around southern Guangdong and Guangxi provinces. We're going to pick up quite a bit of rain there on Monday, but away from that, things are looking pretty good. Sun's out, temperatures are on their way up, and there is also a bit of rain wobbling between the Korean Peninsula and southern Japan, specifically for Kyushu Island on Monday. Let's go to this part of Southeast Asia. We see those rains across Sumatra Island, across Java as well, so you can expect some showers and storms in the picture for Jakarta. And we'll end in this part of Asia where things are hot from Tehran, Shiraz into Herat. Temperatures in the upper 30s, maybe even the 40s. And it's hot still in Pakistan, Jacobabad at 45 degrees.
Music often has the power to unite across the generations and serve as a historic record of events and their emotions when words might fail.
We hope that other generations will come and revive patriotic songs.
Al Jazeera World tells the stories of 4 powerful Arab songs that combine compelling narratives of Middle East conflicts with a deep love for Arab identity and a commitment to the Palestinian cause. Songs of love and war on Al Jazeera.
Will Russia, Turkey and China provide support to Iran in its conflict with Israel? The 3 countries have condemned Israel's actions, but is that enough? And what do they all stand to lose if the conflict spirals out of control? This is Inside Story. Hello, welcome to the programme. I'm Adrian Finnegan. It is a conflict that has the potential to ignite the entire Middle East. Israel has been attacking Iran, saying that Tehran's nuclear programme poses an existential threat. Iran, for its part, has responded with a barrage of retaliatory attacks while insisting that its nuclear programme is for peaceful purposes. But now, with the 2 sides launching missiles and drones at each other, what role can the global community play? China, Russia and Turkey have condemned Israel's actions and called for diplomacy. Beijing and Moscow maintain economic and political ties with both Iran and Israel. So what, if anything, can these powers do to end the conflict? And is there a shift in dynamics in the region? We'll put that to our guests in just a moment. But first, Imogen Kimber reports.
Israel continues to target Iran. And Iran is returning fire, hitting Tel Aviv and other cities. As the battle intensifies, major global and regional powers, including China, Russia and Turkey, have spoken out against Israel, who initiated the conflict.
Vladimir Putin condemned Israel's military operation against Iran and expressed serious concern about a possible escalation of the conflict, which would have unpredictable consequences for the entire situation in the Middle East.
Russia backed Iran in supporting Syria's former leader Bashar al-Assad, and it sees Iran as a counterbalance to US influence in the Middle East. But Moscow also has ties with Israel. After calling the Iranian and Israeli leaders, Russian President Vladimir Putin spoke to US President Donald Trump. Both agreed that negotiations on Iran's nuclear program should continue. There was also a phone call between the Chinese and Israeli foreign ministers, in which China said Israel violated Iran's sovereignty. China has ties with Israel and Iran. Tehran is part of China's Belt and Road project, and Beijing is one of Israel's biggest trading partners.
The sudden escalation of the regional situation does not serve the interests of any party. The Chinese side calls on relevant parties to take actions that promote regional peace and stability and to avoid further escalation of tensions. The Chinese side is willing to play a constructive role in easing the situation.
Turkey, which is a major critic of Israeli policies, said its actions show a disregard for international law, and that Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu is dragging the region and the world into disaster. While Russia, Turkey and China have not pledged any military support for Iran so far, their economic and political ties mean they may have a vested interest in trying to maintain the current balance of power. Imogen Kimber, Al Jazeera for Inside Story.
Let's bring in our guests. From Ankara, we're joined by Barin Kayaoğlu, Chair and Assistant Professor of American Studies at the Social Sciences University of Ankara. From Boston, we're joined by Glenn Kyle, career CIA Officer and Deputy National Intelligence Officer for Transnational Threats from the National Intelligence Council. And from Moscow, we're joined by Nikolai Surkov, who's Assistant Professor at Moscow State Institute of International Relations. Welcome to you all, gentlemen. Nikolai, let's start with you. There's much wringing of hands and condemnation of Israel's attacks on Iran in Moscow, Ankara and Beijing, but all three nations are in a difficult position, aren't they? Particularly Russia, which has good relations with both Israel and Iran. It considers Iran a strategic ally. What might be the Kremlin's thinking right now?
Well, we have a variety of opinions in Moscow right now. Some politicians and policy experts are already warning that the West is changing the equilibrium in the Middle East, the balance in the Middle East, and that this is a Western conspiracy to destroy Russia's main ally in this region. This is one opinion. But more pragmatic people say that we should wait and see. And of course, there is need to support Iran to prevent regime change and major destabilization. But after all, well, Russia's position was always that this war is not Russia's war. And I think this approach is still maintained by the Russian leadership, though, of course, under the current conditions, Russia will do its best to prevent further escalation. By the way, this is our major concern, that due to the hostilities, there might be a spillover that will affect Russian position in the Caspian Sea, and that will affect, of course, the situation in the Gulf. And some people say that in the short run, Russia will win because oil prices will increase. But in the long term, if Iran falls, if it becomes a failed state, or if it survives but has to undergo regime change, that it will be a problem for Russia, because Iran is an important part of Shanghai Cooperation Organization. Iran is an important player in the BRICS, and Iran is one of the countries that promote the idea of a multipolar world. So for Russia, it's a very serious problem. But in the meantime, Russia is also very careful not to alienate Israel completely, because we have very good chemistry between the leadership. And in the previous decade, for example, Israel was one of the major Russian partners in the Middle East, at least in the economic domain. So it's a very difficult balancing game that Russia is trying to play, and Russia is sincerely trying to achieve some kind of a political solution.
All right, but Barin, what about Turkey? A NATO member, of course. Iran and Turkey have long viewed each other's activities with suspicion. Their relationship has been marked by cycles of competition and cooperation. Will this support, this tacit support that Turkey has given, at least verbally, evolve beyond anything more than words and back-channel diplomatic support for its neighbour?
I very much doubt that, Andrew. First of all, thank you for having me on the program. I very much doubt that Turkey will give any material support, especially of the military variant, to Iran. At best, in my analyses and reports, both for public consumption and more confidential sorts for clients and whatnot, I always emphasize, I always use the word frenemy for Turkey and Iran, a portmanteau term for the combined friend and enemy. On the one hand, they are close trading partners. In the past, before the massive sanctions on Iran's hydrocarbon industry, Turkey was a very good customer of Iran's oil and gas industries and would sell a lot of goods and services to Iran. And Iranian tourists are often among the top 5 visitors to Turkey because they don't need a visa to visit here. On the other hand, these two countries have been very serious competitors, geopolitical competitors in the region, especially in Iraq, but especially in Syria. And since the fall of the Assad regime back in December, there has been some coldness, if you will, between Ankara and Tehran. Tehran, of course, is very upset for having lost one of its key critical allies / proxies in the region. And of course, Turkey, the Erdogan government, is in a very good place for having allowed one of its clients, one of its proxies in Syria, to have taken over Syria. That's not to say that Turkey is gloating about Iran's woes in any way, shape, or form. As earlier in the report, President Erdogan's tweets made it very clear that Turkey is very vehemently opposed to Israel's action, and there is a concern that given Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's statements in the past, the Israeli government may be opting not only to degrade Iran's nuclear program, but to catalyze, if you will, a regime change, a massive regime change, possibly a violent one within Iran itself, which is completely against Turkish interests.
Glenn, I'll get your thoughts on both Russia and Turkey in just a moment. But first, to what extent does China stand to be this conflict's biggest geopolitical loser? Has Iran somehow served as a vehicle for China's foreign policy in the Middle East region? What would it mean for China if there was regime change in Tehran?
Yeah, well, at present, China, and in particular, is shaping up to be the big loser in the changes occurring here. China's interests are to have access to low-cost fossil fuels, petroleum, and strategically to strengthen the anti-Western or alternative to Western norms, the normative international system, in favor of a sphere of influence one where China, Russia, the United States, respectively, and other powers have more influence instead of deferring to or trying to adhere to the supposed post-war norms. So in that sense, what's happening is not good for China or Russia strategically, although if oil prices go up, then in a more immediate sense, it's a challenge for them also.
All right. Nikolai, I just wanted, picking up on what you were saying earlier on about the doves and the hawks in Moscow right now, it's the pragmatists that are possibly coming out on top. Iran, of course, provided Russia with weapons for its war in Ukraine. Do you foresee circumstances in which Russia would do the same for Iran? Or would Russia really abandon Iran to stand on its own? That the wide-ranging treaty that the two countries signed at the beginning of the year, didn't include any sort of military alliance or impose any obligations on either side. Is Iran just too politically inconvenient at the moment for Russia, isolated as it still is from the West?
Well, I would say that there are no military obligations, as far as I know, under the treaty. But this treaty was supposed to really expand strategic partnership. When I speak about strategic partnership, I mean deeper economic ties, much greater trade volume, and well, etc., including cultural ties. Because Russia-Iran relations were always unbalanced. We had a serious political cooperation, but there were problems in the economic domain. Now we were trying to balance that. But if you speak about Russia's attitude at the moment, well, as you can see, Russia was trying to improve relations with the West, especially with the US. And Russia never wanted to undermine its relations with Israel. Even, after Israel transferred Patriot systems to the Ukraine, Russia was very careful not to criticize it very intensively. So now I believe that Russia will not provide immediate military support to Iran. But in the future, when the war is over and if this government remains at power, Russia will definitely participate in the reconstruction economically, and Russia might provide some assistance to the Iranians in terms of rebuilding their military potential as well. Some Russian MPs were already mentioning supplies of air defenses, but it will not be an immediate support anyhow. Because right now Russia is trying to find some political solutions, as I said previously.
Barin, what threats and opportunities does this conflict present for Turkish foreign policy? Would Turkey perhaps seize the opportunity, if there is regime change in Iran or if the conflict escalates, to become the regional player, supposing that Iran completely loses its current leverage within the region?
Absolutely. Although, while that might appear as an opportunity for Ankara in the short term, that might appear to be so. In its foreign policy, especially in the last 6-7 years, bracketing Syria, with the exception of Syria, Turkish foreign policy has been rather conservative, I would say. And in general, Turkey has always been very, very skeptical about the notion of forceful regime change in its backyard from abroad. Since the rise of the Arab Spring in 2011, we have witnessed this on multiple occasions, and going back to 2003 with the U.S. occupation of Iraq. Any forceful regime change, especially that from abroad in Iraq and Syria and Libya, has always posed a geopolitical risk for Turkey. So there might be some opportunities in the immediate run, but if there is a regime collapse in Iran and there is an extended period of tumult in Iran, and we face this sort of undocumented immigration of the similar to the one we saw in Syria during the course of that country's 14-year civil war, then that would be a much bigger problem for Turkey. My sense is that, and my reading and my conversations here in Ankara, to me, show that there's much skepticism about the notion of regime change and in Iran. And as far as the Turkish government is concerned, the two sides would rather, and the United States and Russia and hopefully China would rather put a lid on this.
Glenn, to what extent has Israel's action forced Russia, China and Turkey together?
Well, it does push them closer together. I mean, they are allies of more than convenience, but essentially because they oppose what they characterize as U.S. hegemony and the Western normative system, which they find constraining and intrusive in their domestic affairs and, for that matter, their foreign policy affairs. So Israel's attack on Iran has just strengthened what are the reasons for their friendship already. Now, I think both of our colleagues have made good points that neither country, Russia nor China, has an interest in overtly and strongly taking actions by providing weapons or any other action to Iran. Their interests are in being more subtle, and which is what they are, trying diplomatically to decry and to stop destabilization, which war always brings, or regime change. Whereas regime change, I think, really is from the Israeli strategic perspective, and arguably from the American one, the only solution long term to the problem of Iran. Destroying facilities, as Israel has been doing, buys immediate and medium-term improvement from Israel's perspective, but doesn't change the nature of the strategic challenge or objectives of the Iranian regime. Now, whether that will happen and whether that would bring catastrophe, we don't know, but a change of regime is always an alarming situation because no one can really manage that kind of thing very well.
Glenn, to what extent has Israel's actions played into the Iranian leadership's hands?
Oh, I don't think at all. The Iranian regime is in a tight spot. There are surrogates, which Hezbollah and Hamas and the Houthi even in Iraq and Syria, in Gaza, have been seriously weakened in the last 2 years. The Iranian military conventionally is not capable of striking in a meaningful way Israel. They have missiles, which have been shown to be less effective so far than most had feared, although they can still strike and cause damage. So, and they don't have, they have the hostility of a vast majority of the Iranian population. So that gives them the IRGC and the people who control the weapons in Iran, buttressing the regime. They're in a tough spot. They can't do a lot, and their one remaining option is to become a nuclear weapons possessor, which is nuclear weapons are viewed by many as the inoculation against invasion or regime change, because no one wishes to wrestle with a nuclear state. The stakes are so high. However, Iran doesn't have the weapon yet, which is why Israel is acting and why India was constrained in its conflict with Pakistan recently. That's their one choice, one option now, the one card they have to play, which they are quite subtle themselves and intelligent and realize the risks. To do that may well bring actions by the United States and even more by Israel for regime change, and not to do it has put them in a far weakened position. So they don't have a lot of ways forward that are positive for them being the Iranian regime.
Nikolai, what role could Russia play in facilitating a de-escalation of this conflict? Of the major global powers, to what extent is Moscow best placed to do that?
Well, Moscow and Beijing are the two great powers that are viewed by the Iranian leadership as at least friendly states, and that they might play, well, either an intermediary role or to provide some guarantees if there is some kind of an agreement. And these are the two things that are quite essential under the current circumstances. And also, I believe that if there is an agreement, Russia and China will be the key players in rebuilding the Iranian economy, because we need to remember that the Israelis are now actually striking energy industry in Iran. And this might be quite damaging, because Iran was already suffering. And believe me, the real threat to this current government will come after the conflict, when they will have to struggle the economic damage caused by the Israeli strikes. And that will be the major issue. And only after that we will see whether this government will survive or not. But in the meantime, well, Israel and the US are key players. And we could see that the US was providing ammunition to the Israelis, and they have plenty of it. And I think that Israelis will not stop until they decide that Iran is not a source of danger. And until that moment, we will not see any progress on the diplomatic side of this crisis.
Okay.
But after we see real negotiations, then perhaps major powers could do some, could provide some help, but not before that. We can see, from the Russian perspective, we can see that both sides of the conflict are still willing to continue the fight. No one's prepared to stop it at the moment.
All right, but Bahrain, the question that I put to Glenn a few minutes ago when I said, you know, to what extent has Israel played into the regime's hands in Iran, the government's hands there? I was hoping he might have said, well, they could quickly come to the table, agree a nuclear deal, save themselves and save their nuclear program. Where did Turkey stand on Iran's nuclear ambitions, given its dual relationships with both the US as a NATO ally and, of course, Iran, its regional neighbor and trading partner?
For Turkey, Iran's nuclear program at this moment does not pose an existential threat. If Iran were to weaponize its nuclear program, however, then that would change the game, and it might, down the road, force Turkey to consider developing nuclear weapons. There is vehement opposition within Ankara, however, that of becoming a pariah state in world affairs of the sort that Iran is going through right now, and North Korea has become further, and the way that Pakistan has faced massive international sanctions. So there's a lot of opposition to that notion of Turkey developing its own nuclear weapons. So far, Turkey has, since the negotiations in the Obama years, have started and then resulted in the nuclear deal of 2015, which President Trump then got out of in 2018. There's been support to go back to that, to a version of that deal where Iran agrees to inspections, pledges that it will not try to weaponize its nuclear program. It will not enrich uranium beyond a certain point, and would allow inspections to continue. That's more or less the Turkish position, Andrew.
Okay. Glenn, we talked earlier about perhaps China being the biggest geopolitical loser in this conflict. None of what's happening right now will have come as any surprise to China. It's bound to have made contingency plans for this situation, right? You'd think so. It has considerable military power. If this conflict does widen, would the current tension, do you think, force it to project at least some of that in the region, at least to preserve its huge economic and trade interests here?
I don't think so. Its primary interests are really about low-cost energy supplies, and it's, I think, by far the largest purchaser of Iranian petroleum. I don't think that China has never shown the interest or inclination in projecting its military power in the way you describe, which is more how the Americans have done it for decades, and Russia more recently has been doing it that way. But they will certainly try to stop, I think, regime change and such destruction that Iran's capabilities in the petroleum sector would be seriously damaged and world prices would rise. Beyond that, China, I don't think, is likely to do too much, because the costs diplomatically, economically, strategically for China, or the uncertainties at least, of projecting power by starting to become an overt provider of weapons and military support to Iran in this crisis would provide benefits to China, really. I see that as not likely at present.
Gentlemen, there we must end it. Many thanks indeed. Bahrain Kayaoğlu, Glenn Carl and Nikolai Sukhov. And thank you for watching. You can see the programme again at any time by going to the website. You'll find that at AlJazeera.com. For further discussion, join us at our Facebook page at facebook.com/AJ Inside Story. And you can also join the conversation on X. Our handle there is at AJ Inside Story. From me, Adrian Finnegan, and the team here in Doha, we'll see you again. Bye for now.
China's leaders promised economic prosperity in exchange for tight control over the country's population. But is that a trade-off that the Chinese people accept?
He really sees himself as a leader who is chosen by destiny to make China strong.
Ken Roth speaks with journalist and author Emily Feng.
They do feel like they've done so much to economically develop these regions, but of course they're missing the whole picture, which is that you're also trampling on people's human rights.
Reframe on Al Jazeera. The latest news as it breaks.
Police are here to disperse the crowd, but look, there is no crowd here because they've moved on, because they are trying to keep the police guessing where they're going to be next.
With detailed coverage.
The government says the economy is on the road to recovery, but people want to see their lives improve before they can believe that.
From around the world.
With the recent attacks, residents are concerned that the area is slowly receding back to lawlessness.
African narratives from African perspectives.
It's a beautiful morning, a bright sky. Definitely be a good flight.
Short documentaries from African filmmakers from Kenya, Nigeria, and Rwanda.
My heart is full of joy. I love this job so much.
Conservation from above, joy in the traffic, and feeling the game. Africa Direct on Al Jazeera.
Al Jazeera, wherever you are.
At a speed of 800 kilometers an hour.
The story of a small community in one of Mexico's most dangerous states, standing up to criminal cartels and corrupt politicians.
We don't want politicians anymore. They just disunite the people.
In the last episode of Democracy Maybe, we explore how Tehran's elders led the fight for self-determination.
At that time, thinking of the Narcos was the same as thinking of Tehran's government.
By the people on Al Jazeera.
We know what's happening in our region. We know how to get to places that others cannot.
I was just thrown tear gas by the police on purpose.
The fires are still ongoing. I'm afraid you can.
People here said they're being threatened by miners and loggers.
The way that you tell the story is what can make a difference.
Iranian missiles hit the Israeli coastal city of Haifa. At least 15 people are injured there on the third day of attacks. Hello, I'm Louisa Pilbeam. This is Al Jazeera, live from Doha. Also coming up, Israeli attacks in Iran kill more than 224 people. Tehran says the victims include at least 70 women and children.
Well, I hope there's going to be a deal. I think it's time for a deal, and we'll see what happens.
President Donald Trump says he's hopeful Israel and Iran can make a deal, but adds the US will continue its support for Israel's defense. Also ahead, Israel's bombardment of Gaza continues. At least 59 Palestinians have been killed, several while trying to collect food aid. An Iranian missile has hit the major port city of Haifa in Israel, the latest attack in an escalating conflict between the two countries. The strike caused fires and significant damage to a residential area. At least 15 people have been hurt. Air defense systems were activated in several other cities, including Jerusalem and Tel Aviv. It's the third day Iran and Israel have launched attacks at each other. And in the last hour, a new wave of Israeli attacks has been launched on Iran. Air defence systems in Tehran were activated in response to the latest strikes early on Monday morning, local time. At least 224 people have been killed in Iran so far. The Iranian Foreign Ministry is accusing Israel of targeting civilians, saying 70 women and children are among the dead. Bernard Smith reports from the Jordanian capital Amman. He's reporting from there because the Israeli government has banned AlJazeera from reporting inside Israel and the occupied West Bank.
Overnight Sunday into the early hours of Monday, the Israeli military says it is now targeting surface-to-surface missile locations in Iran. The ambition of the Israelis is to degrade the ability of the Iranians to launch those ballistic missiles. Israel says that it has been striking the infrastructure, it says, of the Quds Force, the IRGC, the Iranian military in Tehran, and numerous weapons production sites as well. The Israelis don't say how many Iranian ballistic missiles get through its defense systems. Most of them are successfully intercepted. Israel has its Iron Dome system. It also has its Air Force, and some ballistic missiles are intercepted by the Jordanian military when they enter Jordanian airspace as well. Clearly, a few are getting through, as we've seen from the pictures of the destruction in Haifa, the fires in Haifa, the destruction of the residential buildings in Tel Aviv. But Israel considers it a military information they need to keep under wraps by not revealing exactly how many missiles get through. There is also military censorship in Israel, so if any sites such as military sites or strategically important sites are hit, then it is not allowed to report that sort of information. But clearly, the ballistic missiles that are getting through, the few of them, are causing significant damage, and there are casualties. Bernard Smith, Al Jazeera, Amman.
Let's get the view from Iran now. Tawhid Asadi has more from Tehran.
Escalation is the name of the game that we see as a reality on the ground as confrontations between Iran and Israel are ramping up to a next unprecedented level. Tonight, we heard from Iranians that they struck Israeli territories as a part of their retaliation, and they're saying that they are going to continue as long as the Israeli attacks on the Iranian territories continue. And the reality on the ground here in the capital and also across the country in Iran is that Israelis still continue their attacks, and we see the activation of air defense system of the country, and in particular in the capital. What we hear from the Iranian sources is that they're going to continue and they're going to provide Israelis with a stronger response in case Israelis continue with their attacks. Also, we hear from the Iranians that they have not used their full capabilities. And last but not the least, we hear from the Iranian military officials saying that they have been prepared for years of prolonged confrontation. The reality on the ground right now is showing an escalation and further confrontation between two sides. But how future could unfurl is something for which we have to wait and see what comes next. Tawhid Asadi, Al Jazeera, Tehran.
Iranian President Masoud Pezeshkian says the country is acting in self-defense and will de-escalate as soon as Israel stops its airstrikes. Katia Lopez Hodoyan reports.
Another round of Israeli strikes hit Iran. In and around the capital, Tehran, Israeli targets seem to be expanding. Among them, the provincial headquarters of the Ministry of Defense in Isfahan. And in the northeast, Israel says it struck a refueling plane in the city of Mashhad, describing it as its longest-range strike since the start of its attacks. Sunday's death toll includes the intelligence chief of Iran's Revolutionary Guard, Mohammad Kazemi. Iran's president says more strikes will be met with more retaliation.
Israel Israel knows no boundaries. They intrude wherever they want, with permission from America. In a conversation that U.S. envoy Steve Witkoff had with our foreign minister, he said that Israel cannot do anything without our permission, meaning these recent strikes is also carried out with America's permission.
The fighting between longtime foes is fueling fears, but many in Iran support the government's retaliation.
They used to call us terrorists. So what? Now even America and Britain should fear us. Let them be scared.
We are not really scared. We are more worried for our children. We belong to a generation of war. We are not scared of such incidents.
With no signs of de-escalation, roads have been clogged, with many people driving out of Tehran. There's also long queues at petrol stations amid growing concerns of oil shortages and price hikes.
People are worried, and most of the petrol stations are crowded because people are planning to get out of the city.
Many are bracing for more attacks. Government officials say metro stations will be open 24 hours a day to be used as shelters.
We don't have access to shelter. There are no shelters in the whole city. I don't think there are any places people can go into in an emergency.
Amid rising tensions, Iran's foreign minister says it's ready to return to diplomacy if Israeli aggression stops. Katia Lopez-Odoyan, Al Jazeera.
US President Donald Trump and other world leaders are on their way to the G7 summit in Canada, where the Israel-Iran escalation is expected to be on their minds. Our diplomatic editor James Bays is in Banff in Western Canada, where the summit is set to begin on Monday.
Leaders of the G7 countries arriving for their annual summit, a meeting that will now be dominated by conflict and a rising death toll in the Middle East. As he left the White House to head here, President Trump was still talking about a nuclear agreement with Iran.
Well, I hope there's going to be a deal. I think it's time for a deal, and we'll see what happens. But sometimes they have to fight it out, but we're going to see what happens. I think there's a good chance there'll be a deal.
With neither Iran or Israel represented at the summit, Trump is the only person who could influence events on the ground. But the other leaders will be concerned about Israeli efforts to get the US to join the war and expand the goal to toppling the Iranian system. A former senior State Department official told me summits of leaders have in the past helped at a time of global crisis, but he's not optimistic this time.
I think there's discomfort all the way around. We're not just talking about the latest conflict being the Israeli-Iranian strikes. We're also talking about the war continuing in Gaza. And so I do think there'll be a lot of discussions. They'll be very timely, but it's hard to see within the contours of this leaders meeting in the G7 how they're going to be able to take decisive action on any of those fronts.
There'll be a range of views here. Most of the G7 nations, while saying they'd like to see a return to diplomacy, have adopted their usual mantra: Israel has the right to defend itself. The one exception is Japan, which strongly condemned Israel's attack on Iran on Friday. In addition to the G7 leaders, there are leaders of another 8 countries who've been invited here. They include South Africa and Brazil, which have both firmly condemned Israel's actions. President Trump's tariffs on countries around the world, including the US's closest allies, have already brought great economic uncertainty this year. Leaders gathering here in the mountains will be concerned that the global economy could be further impacted by a conflict raging in a region that's so important to the world's energy supply. James Bays, Al Jazeera, at the G7 summit in Canada's Rocky Mountains.
Alex Batanka is a senior fellow at the Middle East Institute in Washington, D.C. He specialises in Middle East regional security affairs with a particular focus on Iran. And I'm pleased to say that you join us live now from Washington, D.C., Alex. So where do Iranian officials stand at the moment? Does Iran want peace?
No, as we just heard in the segment, the statements that have come out of Iranian Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi and others, including Masoud Pezeshkian, the president, clearly suggest that they're looking for a way to end at least this round of hostilities. There seems to be a demand or a wish, if you will, on their part, which is to get the United States and the Europeans to come out and condemn what Israel did, to condemn what they say was unjustified attack. Certainly, they're very upset with the IAEA for not condemning an attack on Iran's nuclear facilities. But even if they don't get that, I suspect even if Iran doesn't get that condemnation, I think they will settle for the West, the United States, stopping what the Iranians are calling an aggression. So if the Israelis stop, the Iranians will in turn stop their missile attacks. That's my reading of the statements that I have been able to pick up the last couple of hours.
Alex, so I wonder if you believe that in terms of Iran, they see the US diplomacy as separate and more hopeful than any kind of diplomacy with Israel then?
Well, that's a big question. I think the Iranians are probably still not sure what's going on. Did Israel really go ahead and attack Iran without really notifying the United States, which at this point nobody really believes anymore? Clearly the US, and I think President Trump has in so many words accepted that he knew what was going on. Here's the big question. Was this attack by Israel, or these last few days of attacks on Iran, meant to force the Iranians to come back to the negotiations and make new concessions? Is that what this was all about? Which might have been the reason why President Trump decided to go along with it. But what would President Trump do if it becomes clear that at this point, Israel's changed the goalpost? That for Israel, it's about regime change. That Prime Minister Netanyahu has kind of signaled that pretty strongly, that he thinks the best way to deal with the Iranian nuclear issue is to have a new political system in Iran. If that is what Israel wants, or Prime Minister Netanyahu, it's a big question mark whether President Trump, given his political track record on involving the United States in wars in the Middle East, what he would do, whether he would support it. It's a big question mark. I'm not sure if we know the answer to that.
And Alex, well, that question may well be answered as we're seeing shots of Tel Aviv, live pictures now on our screens of Tel Aviv, where missiles are being launched. Let's have a listen in there. So these are pictures, live pictures of Tel Aviv, where we're seeing Israel's air defense systems there intercepting missiles that have been launched into its airspace. So we're not seeing any of those hit the ground and make impact at the moment. But I've just been speaking with Alex Vatanka, Senior Fellow at the Middle East Institute in Washington, and we were discussing whether Iran wants peace. We don't know, we haven't had any confirmation into us where these rockets have been launched from, but of course over the last 2 nights and into the 3rd day, we've seen exchanges of missiles between Iran and Israel. These are live pictures of Tel Aviv's night sky in the early hours, where we are seeing missiles being launched into Tel Aviv in the latest round, presumably from Iran. Let's bring back in Alex Vatanka, who we were discussing the situation, the current situation in terms of these missile strikes. And we were just saying, Alex, discussing whether Iran wants peace, but presumably these rockets have been launched, these missiles, from Iran. What do you make of these latest rounds of missiles?
Look, both countries are obviously stating that they're in this for the long haul. I have heard that from Israeli officials. This could be days, weeks in the making, in the coming. And the Iranians are saying they're prepared for this war for decades. I mean, you can ask all sorts of questions, whether this is just rhetoric on both sides. The fact is, neither Israel nor Iran has ever engaged in a conflict on this scale. I mean, the Iranians haven't fought anything like this ever. I mean, the last time they had a conventional war on a major scale was with Iraq, Saddam Hussein back in 1980 to 88, a very different war, nothing as intense as this. Israelis have never dealt with a country the size of Iran. They've dealt with the likes of Hezbollah, Hamas. Obviously, in recent years, we have to go back to the 70s last time Israel had to deal with a neighboring state in a war. So I have questions about how long Israel and Iran can, from a military point of view, stay the course with the intensity of hitting each other as we've seen it the last 3 nights. That's a question mark for me as I watch this. But I really do also think, at least from the Iranian point of view, I sense that they do want to sort of end this. Diplomacy should resume. But I don't know if the Iranians have figured out if they can come back with an offer that actually might work for Netanyahu. And it could be on enrichment, but I suspect what Netanyahu really is asking for, if he accepts that the regime survives in Tehran, he wants a very different Iranian regional policy, one that stops supporting what the Israelis call Iranian proxies that go after Israel. So I'm not sure if the officials in Tehran have made up their mind, if they're ready to go there to make a regional compromise beyond the nuclear issue. But if they are willing to do that, that might just be what it takes for Trump to be able to pull the Israelis away from attacking Iran.
And Alex, we're now seeing live shots of Haifa in Israel. So elsewhere in Israel, where missiles have also been launched from Iran. So another wave of missiles towards Haifa this time. So multiple areas of Israel. We believe that this is energy infrastructure that has been targeted in this attack in Haifa. So as you were mentioning there, Alex, it seems that these tit-for-tat launches of missiles, these attacks will continue. Israel saying initially that they were planning on continuing this for 2 weeks. Do you think that's a likely time frame that these tit-for-tat attacks will continue?
Yeah, if we're limiting ourselves to 2 weeks, if you will, I suspect both sides will obviously survive. Plenty of innocent Iranians and Israelis will suffer or die as a result. But I don't think look, let me put it to you this way. I don't want to be cold about it, but if this conflict spills over to the region, and you're just talking about Haifa, I understand one of the targets in Haifa was the oil refinery. The Iranians decided after Israel struck the South Pars gas facilities in the Gulf region that they're going to return the favor by hitting energy infrastructure in Israel. And that's the sort of thing that might get us to a point where things go from nuclear and military sites and assassinations to any target, essentially, including energy and economic assets being a fair game. And that's when you have to be fearful that it could spill over. For example, the Iranians have threatened to close the Strait of Hormuz. They have said that if our energy infrastructure comes under attack, then anything within our ability to reach might be a legitimate target. And they have said, increasingly warned, that they consider the United States to be involved in this. Again, the U.S. has billions of dollars of investment in that region. That might be a pressure point for Iran to use, if you will, on the Trump administration to say, do you really want to see the prices of oil skyrocket? Maybe it's time for Washington to put pressure on Israel. Because the Iranians right now really, as I said, seems very clear to me that they do want to end this. They don't have the confidence that they can stay the course, regardless of what they're saying in terms of their words. I don't sense they have the confidence that they can stay in this game for long. But remember, Iran is alone. It's got no friends. It's on its own. Israel's got the United States, most of Europe, and plenty of other friends and partners that support Israel. And that should obviously be a concern for Tehran.
Alex, we are seeing, though, Iran continue those missile strikes, and we have now had strikes tonight now in Haifa, Jerusalem and Tel Aviv. On our screens now, Tel Aviv. We were just hearing the sirens being sounded there, which is just slightly still here now, but the night sky or the early morning sky is empty of missiles at the moment. We can see some flames in the background, and we believe that energy infrastructure has been targeted. As you mentioned, Alex, though, Iran on their own here, Israel has a lot more military support, doesn't it? So how do you see this panning out?
You know, it's a fundamental question about the handling of Iranian foreign policy for the last many decades. They have to ask themselves, why did they end up being so isolated? If you are Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei and you are a member of the leadership in the Revolutionary Guards, that is the most important question you have to ask yourself. How do we end up being so isolated? They banked so much for decades in the so-called proxy network, the likes of Hezbollah, Hamas, Islamic Jihad, the Houthis, the Hashd al-Shaabi in Iraq. Look at those groups today. Which of them are actually able to, even if they wanted to, but are able to actually do anything good for Iraq? That's the problem Iran has. Where is Russia? Where is China? So the Iranians have to ask more fundamental questions about the state of their foreign policy, because I think if we get ourselves out of this situation, and hopefully we will soon, then the day after, it's really prime time for Tehran to consider its overall regional posturing, I think, because this is sort of the most obvious for me to say. You know who dislikes Iran's foreign policy in the region the most, I would argue? The Iranian people, who right now are fearing for their lives. They're opposed to what Iran is doing. That's not to say they support what Israel's doing, but they find themselves in a position where they think that this war could have been avoided, if Iran had pursued a different regional approach. And, you know, it didn't. And here we are dealing with the consequences.
OK, yes, dealing with the consequences. Alex Vatanka, Senior Fellow at the Middle East Institute in Washington, thank you very much for your analysis there. Let's go now to Bernard Smith in the Jordanian capital, Amman. We are just seeing shots on our screen now of Tel Aviv. Other areas of Israel have also been hit with missiles, Haifa and Jerusalem. And we have seen missiles flying through the sky there in Tel Aviv. We're going to speak with Bernard Smith, our correspondent in the Jordanian capital, Amman. Bernard.
Yes.
Bernard, can you hear me? Bernard Smith.
We just saw, we just saw the end of one of the missiles. Sort of heading towards the southern bit of Israel, passing over the top of Amman, as they do sometimes, although there was no alert over the city this time. Again, this is similar to Saturday. This is now, you know, very early hours of Monday morning here. This is sort of a similar pattern, if you like, to overnight Saturday into Sunday, in which there were two separate waves in the overnight hours. The video you're seeing, yes, other targets hit across, other areas targeted across Israel. The Israeli military said that they put out sirens from about 4:10 local time, about sort of 10 minutes ago. The sirens first went off. They said the public is instructed to follow the instructions, request to follow the instructions of the Home Command. Also, it said the IDF emphasised not to publish and share the locations and footage of any of the hits. Israel says that about more than 200 odd missiles since Friday have come from Iran, been fired by Iran to Israel. Most of them get intercepted by either the Israeli Air Force before they hit Israeli territory, or some by the Jordanian Air Force, or others by Israel's Iron Dome protective system. But clearly, as we see from the videos, one or two, a few get through. Sometimes they're publicised because they land, as we've seen video from in the daytime aftermath of these hits. They cause devastation to some residential areas, and there have been casualties, 14 people killed in Israel since the first missiles were launched. But there is military censorship in Israel, as there is in many countries during times of war, because you're not allowed to publish if missiles hit on what might be deemed strategically sensitive or military sensitive sites. So we don't know exactly how many missiles get through, except that the Israelis say most of them are intercepted, but obviously some do get through.
And we're seeing pictures on our stream, live pictures of Haifa in Israel, where energy infrastructure has been hit. We're seeing at least, well, there seems to be at least 2 chimneys there in terms of that energy infrastructure that are on fire. We're seeing those blazes now after those missiles were launched, reportedly from Iran, into Haifa, Israel, as well as other areas in Israel, including Jerusalem and Tel Aviv. And it seems that the energy infrastructure is what has been targeted there. So not all of those missiles were intercepted by Israel's defence systems. Bernard, do we know any more detail about what exactly has been hit there? As I mentioned, we seem to be seeing on fire chimneys there, and as has been happening in the last 2 days, those infrastructure targets are what Iran has been going for.
Well, I guess some of the targets that Iran will be seeking out are in reflection of the targets that the Israelis have sought out in Iran. Israel has said that it has been striking, particularly today, it says, to degrade the Iranian regime's weapons production capabilities. It says it's been targeting the infrastructure of Quds forces, the IRGC, Iranian military in Tehran, and numerous weapons production sites across Iran. And it has been striking today, it says, surface-to-surface missile sites. Well, the Iranians say they are also targeting now in response. This has earlier been commented on, energy infrastructure of Israel. It's obviously Israel is a much smaller country and more densely populated, and Haifa is a strategically important port city where there is a refinery. And so if the Iranians are targeting energy infrastructure, then this would be a key target for them.
Yes, as you mentioned there, Bernard, it is a port city, Haifa, and we are seeing latest pictures now of more missiles being launched into the sky. Israel's defence systems intercepting many of those there. This is the 3rd day of this escalation and what many analysts have been calling this tit for tat in terms of attacks between Iran and Israel. Israel has also indicated that this could continue for the next 2 weeks, and Iran saying today that they will give a powerful response. The Iranian president saying we will give a powerful response to any aggression that Israel may commit. And here it seems that they are standing by their word with this latest barrage of missiles targeting energy infrastructure. That seems to be the latest of what we know at the moment, Bernard, that these 3 areas of Israel have been targeted. Haifa, the port city, strategically important north of the capital, Tel Aviv, and then Jerusalem as well being targeted. So, Bernard, Iran seem to be showing that they do have the firepower, even though many analysts we've spoken to this evening saying that Iran is isolated in terms of the world, Israel clearly not so, that Iran is continuing their fight here.
Well, they do have the practical firepower for the moment. If the analysis, the estimations are accurate, that there's more than 200 or so missiles were launched. That was before the sort of 2 waves tonight, so we'll have to wait for an updated estimation. But and Israel saying that about 22 locations, again before this latest wave, 22 locations in the country had been hit. That means that some of the 200 missiles that Iran fired got through to those locations. The estimates are from sort of military experts and analysts that Iran could have upwards of around 2,000 ballistic missiles at the upper estimates. And so if they have that number and the rate at which they are firing at Israel continues at this pace, then they certainly have the capability for several more days to be able to keep launching these strikes against Israeli territory.
Okay. Bernard, you mentioned there that Iran does have the firepower, but we have been hearing from many commentators who say that Iran doesn't want to, ideally, continue this, what many people are calling a war, that it's already a war. In terms of what we know so far from what Iran is saying, do they want a peaceful conclusion or do they want to fight on?
Well, the Iranians will say that it was Israel that started this war. It was Israel that took out and killed senior Iranian nuclear scientists, senior leadership of Iran's military. And Iran is responding and defending itself and reacting to Israel's attacks. Iran says it has the capabilities to continue and to strike hard against Israel. And Israel, while it has now, it seems, certainly got air superiority over Iran. It's hit targets way into Iran. It hit an aircraft, a refueling aircraft far in the east, an indication of how far Israel is able to fly its air force, its air power without interruption. It clearly has a lot of capability, Israel, but it is very worried about Iran's ballistic capability in response, and that has been shown by the missiles that Iran has been able to fire back at Israel since Friday. As I say, if it keeps up at this pace, and it has as many ballistic missiles as experts and analysts estimate, up to around 2,000 or so, then it could keep up this for several more days, but not indefinitely.
Bernard, I just wonder if we are hearing from any other international, is there any other international response? Of course, many world leaders are at the G7 at the moment. The US president is there. Do you think that we will expect to hear the US president speak at the G7? He's clearly Donald Trump. He likes to speak to the press. And do you think that he will continue speaking on this, or do you think he will be more measured in terms of his response?
Well, Donald Trump has said that he believes that a deal could still be reached. He wants the Iranians to come to the negotiating table, and the suggestions that Donald Trump believes that this Israeli assault on Iran's nuclear capabilities will bring the Iranians to the negotiating table. There's no indication of that yet, and there's no indication that the Israelis are ready to slow up their attempt to degrade Iran's nuclear capabilities. Israel says that that is the intention of this. Israel's military has said that their goal is to remove the capabilities of this regime to annihilate us. Pointedly, Israel's military has said we are not here. Our goal is not regime change, although Benjamin Netanyahu has hinted at that, but the Israeli military has made it clear that that is not its intention.
Bernard Smith in the Jordanian capital, Amman, thank you. Let's recap what we've just seen over the last 20 minutes or so. Iran has launched a series of missile attacks towards Israel. We've seen some intercepted and some hit in the cities of Tel Aviv, Jerusalem and Haifa. It's just the latest barrage in a major escalation that we've seen over the past 3 days. Let's listen into some of those attacks.
All right, right, let's go back to Bernard Smith in the Jordanian capital, Amman. Bernard, I wonder if you could just tell us, what's the damage from the latest strikes that are going on? What are you hearing as far as these Iranian strikes that are targeting Israel right now?
Well, we know the earlier wave of strikes hit areas in Haifa, in the north of Israel. That's strategically important port city. 2 buildings were hit in that first wave this evening. There were several people wounded, and there were people wounded in a community in the south of Israel. We haven't got any indications yet of casualties, obviously, from this latest strike. But it looks like Israel is hitting again, it looks like Iran is targeting again the strategically important port city of Haifa, although that obviously we've seen missiles come down, missiles targeted towards major population centers across Israel. We know most of those get intercepted either by the Israeli Air Force or by the Jordanian Air Force if they're flying over Jordanian airspace, and they get intercepted by Israel's Iron Dome missiles as well. Clearly, obviously, a few are getting through, some are getting through.
All right, that's Bernard Smith live for us from Amman in Jordan. We're going to go now to Patty Culhane, who's live for us from Washington, D.C. Patty, we saw these reports earlier that President Trump reportedly had vetoed a plan by Benjamin Netanyahu, the Prime Minister of Israel, to kill Iran's supreme leader. What more can you tell us about some of these reports that have emerged?
Well, so far, it's really only seen it from Reuters and the Associated Press and Axios. The major U.S. newspapers haven't picked it up yet. But the report is that there were, from 2 American sources, that the Israelis did ask to assassinate the supreme leader, Ali Khamenei, and that the Trump administration, that U.S. President Donald Trump vetoed that, said absolutely not. We haven't been able to confirm that, but it would go along with what we've heard from the president, which is that he doesn't want to see this situation escalate. He doesn't want to see Americans targeted. He said if that happens, the U.S. would get involved. But I think it's important to point out the difference between what we've seen as a response from President Donald Trump and former President Joe Biden as we hear those rockets over the skies of Israel. Let's not forget when Iran struck Israel during President Biden's term, we saw President Biden rush military assets to U.S. military assets to the region. I believe at the time there were like 300 Iranian missiles. And I remember the Biden administration really bragging about the fact that they were able to help down so many of those missiles. So what is the U.S. doing now? Well, we do know the U.S. is helping with the Israeli air defenses. We do know that 2 U.S. destroyers were in the Mediterranean already. They were rerouted to the eastern Mediterranean. Those are capable of shooting down missiles, and there's been some indication that perhaps U.S. fighter jets are involved in that, but I don't think we've had confirmation from the U.S. military. But I think under the Biden administration, it would have been a much bigger deal that people are actually dying and being injured and buildings are being hit in Israel. That is not something that we're used to seeing, and it's not something that really, truly, that the U.S. has really talked much about. In fact, even though this is happening right now, and it is just a large-scale back-and-forth volleying of bombs and weapons, when Donald Trump went to Marine One because he's traveling to the G7, the very first thing he talked about was not what's happening in Israel, not what's happening in Iran. He wanted to complain about the meteorologists who forecasted rain during the parade marking not only the 250th anniversary of the Army, but it fell on his 79th birthday. He said that the forecasters completely got it wrong and talked about how you can forecast weather out 100 years, which you just can't. But Obviously, he is very concerned about the crowd size, the very small crowd size that he received for that military parade. So he did talk about it when questioned about it, and he said he thinks that they're going to make a deal. It's time. He said it's time for a deal. Good chance they'll make a deal. He said sometimes they just have to fight it out, but that he wants to see a deal made, and that's the big question here. We saw during the war in Gaza, we saw in the back and forth with Lebanon and Iran, former U.S. President Joe Biden really didn't want to put restraints on Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. The question now, and it's a very open question, is will U.S. President Donald Trump do just that?
All right, that's Patty Culhane live for us from Washington, D.C. Thanks so much, Patty. All right, let's go now to Alan Pincus. He's a former Israeli diplomat and columnist for the independent newspaper in the UK. He joins us on the phone from Tel Aviv. Alan, if you could give our viewers an update on what you are seeing and hearing there in Tel Aviv. We have these very dramatic pictures that we're seeing live of what's going on in the skies over Tel Aviv, these missiles that have been launched from Iran. And now we're seeing pictures from Haifa. What are you seeing and hearing in Tel Aviv?
Good morning, Mohammed. Well, to be honest, I'm seeing the same thing that you are. It's not like I have just because I'm here doesn't mean I have a better viewpoint. Essentially, what you're seeing on your television screens is what I'm seeing on my television screens. I'm in Tel Aviv. There was a series of sirens in Tel Aviv and the general central Israel area. There were sirens all throughout Israel, but I can attest to those in Tel Aviv. There have been various or several interception attempts, and so there were, pretty noisy booms up above. But to be honest, looking out the window from a relatively high floor, I see nothing.
Alan,
I'm sorry to disappoint you.
There's been a lot of reports, Alan, today about what Netanyahu, the Prime Minister of Israel, may have been planning when it comes to the campaign against Iran. And there was one report earlier that said that they had mentioned to the White House that perhaps there was a plan to kill the supreme leader of Iran. I'm wondering if you could talk about how that's playing out across the Israeli media landscape and what you're hearing from the public in Israel.
All right. I saw those reports just like you did, and I think the Israeli media has no better ways to ascertain the veracity. They all quote the same two sources that your reporter just quoted in the preceding segment. It does raise two questions, though, Mohammed. The first is, why would Israel ask the U.S. to do something like this? B, why would the U.S. leak this? Was it deliberate to scare the political leadership of Iran and show them that nothing is off the table? Or was it just someone trying to show that the U.S. is involved in a way that, exercising restraint, or asking Israel, rather, to exercise restraint? I don't think there was anything more than that. However, the way it is being interpreted is that it would not have seen the light of day, this piece of news, that Israel apparently was thinking about this, that it consulted the U.S., and the U.S. said, not now. It does indicate, supposedly to Iran, that this is being considered. Now, I don't know necessarily that is true. I don't know necessarily that will happen. But it does. It does seem like, sort of an escalation of sorts, at least by one notch. At the same time, Mohammed, I have to say that if you cherry pick some of the statements from yesterday, there were also three statements made first by Mr. Netanyahu himself, enumerating the great successes, and concluding that Israel set back the Iranian nuclear program, at least the military nuclear program, but it was a way that there is little we could do beyond this. Then came another leak from a senior military source, obviously I don't know who that was, who said this can't go on forever. There's a limit to what the military could do. And then there was a third statement attributed to some senior political source, meaning someone in the vicinity of the prime minister, that was basically asking the U.S. to join in, at least on the attack in Fordo, the heavily fortified enrichment facility just south of Tehran. If you take those three and connect them, you see that Israel is leaving some latitude or maneuvering room for the U.S. to try and make an offer to Iran to go back to the negotiating table after they have been struck in the last 4 days or 3.5 days. But again, this is me and you guesstimating. We don't know.
Alon, let me ask you, Prime Minister Netanyahu, he's signaled this expectation of U.S. backing going forward. If Washington continues to withhold military involvement, what are the next military or even political options for Netanyahu, from your perspective?
Not many, to be honest, because, there is a limit. Israeli jets fly 1,600 kilometers to Iran. I mean, this is 1,600 kilometers, and it's less if they carry a heavy payload. And in order to sustain an ongoing operation, you need jets in the air and to take air defenses and to bomb targets. If you've noticed until now, Israel conspicuously refrained from attacking Iranian military targets. I mean, yeah, some were hit, but it's not part of the campaign. The Iranian Navy, Iranian airfields, Iranian military bases. This was more targeted toward the nuclear facilities and the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps installations. However, I honestly, unless the U.S. gets involved, which I don't see that happening unless the Iranians make some gross mistake or miscalculation and attack either some Arab Gulf states or the Straits of Hormuz or indeed American vessels, I don't see the Americans going in. Of course, this is based on what we know now. Unless that happens, this more or less exhausted itself.
All right, Alon Pincus, thanks for joining us so much on Al Jazeera. We'll be coming back to you in the next hour. We appreciate your time. Let's go now to Gideon Levy. He's a columnist at the Haaretz newspaper. He joins us live from Tel Aviv. Gideon, I'm told you were close to what's going on, that you've been seeing and hearing these rockets that have been launched towards Tel Aviv and all that is going on in the skies above Tel Aviv. Can you get our viewers up to speed?
Sure. I'm very grateful I didn't see, but I hear it and how. I heard it and how. It was the closest ever, I guess. I was in the public shelter next to my home, and the booms this time were much, much stronger than ever. And getting out of the shelter, we saw already, or we heard from neighbors about windows broken. It's not far away, I don't know exactly where. And it was serious, no doubt. Then it was followed by sirens of ambulances and other aid workers. I know nothing more than this, but it was very, very strong and quite fearful.
Gideon, I want to ask you about what's going on politically in Israel right now. From your perspective, what are the political objectives of the Prime Minister, Benjamin Netanyahu? Is it deterrence? Is it degradation of the nuclear capabilities of Iran? Or is it regime change in Tehran?
First of all, that's his life project, Muhammad. We can be cynical about him, and he deserves cynicism. But we cannot deny that this is his life project, right or wrong. This is his life project. He's fighting the nuclear capabilities of Iran ever since he's in power. He made terrible mistakes, mainly the mistake to pull out the United States from the agreement that Barack Obama signed. Fatal mistake, because we would have been in a different place if this was not violated, if this agreement wouldn't have been violated. But ever since then, that's his life project. I guess that it's a mixture of consideration. I cannot get into his heart or into his mind, but I give him the credit that he believes that what he is doing now is the right thing to do in historical terms. I'm sure he's convinced. Time will show if this is true. Yes, changing the regime of in Tehran is obviously a hidden goal, like transferring 2.3 million people from Gaza is a hidden goal in Israel. But even if nobody will admit it, everything will be done to get to it, and both are unachievable, I'm afraid, or I'm happy. But in any case, both are unachievable. Meanwhile, he went to this campaign, as usual, with a lot of success in the beginning, as usual, with a lot of support, almost wall-to-wall in Israel, and as usual, very soon it might turn into a fiasco. We don't know yet. But I just wrote yesterday, excuse me for quoting myself, the trumpets are too early because we don't know how will it end. As usual, you know, in those campaigns, how do you start? You don't know how do you end. It might end. It might be the most dangerous war that Israel had ever launched.
Gideon, we are seeing these live pictures now out of Haifa. People have come out of some of the buildings. We clearly see that there is damage that has been done in Haifa from this latest barrage of missiles from Iran towards Israel. I'm wondering if you could tell our viewers about the impact that all of this is having on Israeli citizens and what the thinking is there when it comes to how protected they may be when it comes to the government and what the government is doing to protect them.
So first of all, part of Israelis are very, very well protected. First of all, the alarm system is extremely functioning this time. We get alarms much before the siren. We can prepare ourselves. In Tel Aviv, there are, or at least in most parts of Tel Aviv, for example, there are quite many shelters. All the new buildings have their own shelters and safe rooms. So from this point of view, you have the feeling that the population is protected, which is not true to huge other populations in Israel. For example, the Israeli Palestinians, the Bedouins, they don't have one single shelter all over Israel. I intend to go today to the village of Tamra, where a whole family was killed because they don't have any shelter in a city of 35,000 people, not one single shelter. When next by Jewish village of 1,000 inhabitants has 30. So you understand that even this is not on very just and equal light. You asked about the sentiment. I think that the more nights like this will take place, Israelis will start to not only be tired and frightened, but then they will finally start to ask, is it worth it and where are we heading to? From war to war, from bombarding to bombarding? Because this time, unlikely Gaza, unlikely Lebanon, the price of the civilian population might be much heavier than ever. So Israel can take it for a few days. It cannot take it for a long period of time.
Gideon, it seems we're hearing sirens again now, air raid sirens again in Israel. I want to ask you if you're hearing them as well, but also I want to ask you about, from your perspective, what might be an attainable political endgame for Israel in this conflict? I mean, are there any realistic conditions under which Israel would consider these operations against Iran complete or successful?
First of all, in Tel Aviv, there are no sirens right now and no warnings. And this question about the end game must be, first of all, directed to the Prime Minister. And why do I say so? Because I'm not sure he knows. I know what are his fantasies, as you mentioned, the changing in Iran, making Iran the best ally of Israel, like it was in the 60s and 70s. But realistically, I don't know if the Prime Minister knows how to get out of it, like he didn't know how to get out of Gaza. It's a policy with him to know to start things and never know how to end them because you don't have realistic goals and you don't think about the day after. And this time, I'm afraid it's going to repeat itself. In other words, it again and again depends on the Americans. In Gaza, they could have put an end to the war. They didn't. Now they are less capable of putting an end to the war because there is a very powerful other party, namely Iran, which might continue, might not get any reasonable conditions because everything will be perceived by them as defeat. And the last thing they want now is to be defeated, especially this regime. So the hope should be that anything will lead to the diplomacy table, back to the diplomacy table. Otherwise, this war can become a war of attrition for years, not months, Muhammad, for years. We know how long was the war between Iran and Iraq, over 10 years. I hope we are not there, but I don't see right now any leverage to pull both parties out of this vicious circle they are in. And so much depends on one person, Donald Trump, who cannot be trusted and is never expected. He's always unexpected, and he also changes his taste and views like people change their socks. So I really don't know what to tell you. We have to wait and cross our fingers that something will happen which will return the parties to the negotiations table.
All right, Gideon Levy joining us live from Tel Aviv. Gideon, thanks so much for your analysis. We appreciate it. Let's go now to Bernard Smith in the Jordanian capital, Amman. Bernard, we were talking to you just a few minutes ago. I'm wondering if you could bring our viewers up to date on what you are seeing and hearing, and if we've heard any new statements from the government of Israel.
Mohammed, yeah, this is the end of the second wave of Iranian missiles fired at Israel overnight. We are now in the just pre-dawn hours of Monday morning. The Israeli Home Command has now given the all clear. It said people can leave protected spaces in several areas across the country. They say that search and rescue forces are operating in several locations in which reports of fallen projectiles were received, and public is requested to continue listening for instructions. And we've seen those videos that clearly some projectiles, some missiles have breached Israel's defenses. It looks like Haifa port, which seems to have been a repeated target of Iranian missiles, Haifa port has been hit. Maybe there is a refinery there. And so that could be a target for the Iranians because they say they're targeting Israeli infrastructure targets, as the Israelis have been targeting Iranian infrastructure targets. And there have also been reports of debris in Tel Aviv, and while missiles have also been seen over Jerusalem. Inevitably, ordinarily, most of what is fired at Israel seems to get intercepted and destroyed by Iron Dome or the Israeli Air Force before they hit the ground. But there is shrapnel, there is debris, and clearly one or two missiles, some missiles are getting through.
Yeah, Bernard, I wanted to ask you about that because obviously we are in this situation now where there is this tit for tat that's going on. Iran firing, Israel firing on Iran, Iran firing on Israel. You're talking about the missiles that have come from Iran that have been able to breach the Iron Dome air defense system in Israel and land in Israel. What's the extent of what we know about, perhaps how many of those missiles have been intercepted, and perhaps how many have gotten through?
Well, estimates before this latest wave of missiles, where there were 200 or so missiles that Iran had fired at Israel. That's coming from Israeli sources. Now, the Israelis don't say exactly how many they intercept and exactly how many get through, and they say they don't say that because that is sensitive information that could be useful to their enemy. But we do know that clearly we see some getting through of those 200 that have been fired. And the Israelis, again, this is before the latest wave tonight, said they had released information that 22 sites had been impacted. There's a media blackout, military censorship on if missiles might hit militarily sensitive sites, strategically sensitive sites. Again, Israel is a country now at war, and so there is censorship over reporting of those locations. But obviously, we've seen the destruction in civilian areas where missiles have got through, and those that do get through cause devastating damage to buildings. And before tonight's missiles, of 14 people in Israel had been killed by Iranian missiles.
All right, that's Al Jazeera's Bernard Smith joining us from the Jordanian capital, Amman. Thanks, Bernard. If you're just joining us, it's just past 2 GMT. That's 5 a.m. in Israel, and we're continuing our breaking news coverage of the Iran-Israel escalation. In the last hour, Iran has launched a new wave of attacks targeting cities across Israel. One strike appears to have hit an energy plant near Haifa port, sparking a large fire. The coastal city has been repeatedly targeted by Iran over the past 4 days. And in Tel Aviv, air defense systems have been activated to intercept the Iranian attacks there. Multiple missiles have been fired into the sky in an attempt to stop the strikes getting through. Parts of Tel Aviv have been directly hit in previous waves of attacks. So now we're seeing live images from on the ground in Tel Aviv, where significant damage has been caused to residential areas. Emergency services are responding to several parts of the city. And in the last couple of hours, a new wave of Israeli attacks were launched on Iran. Air defense systems in Tehran were activated in response to the latest strikes early on Monday morning local time. At least 224 people have been killed in Iran so far. The Iranian Foreign Ministry is accusing Israel of targeting civilians, saying 70 women and children are among the dead. Ori Goldberg is an Israeli political commentator. He joins us now from Tel Aviv. Ori, I wonder if you could just bring our viewers up to date first about what you have seen and heard in the last 30 to 45 minutes, this barrage of missiles that have been launched from Iran towards Israel. We've seen a lot of dramatic pictures from over the skies of Tel Aviv and Haifa and the damage that's been done as a result of those attacks.
Well, I didn't see much because I was sheltering with my children at our building's communal shelter, but we heard interceptors being released, and we heard pretty intense bangs in the close proximity. I don't know of any impact immediately around us, but I understand that there have been some, as you reported, in the Tel Aviv area.
Ori, I heard you speaking on our air earlier in the evening with regard to the sentiment in Israel. On the one hand, backing of this war effort, but on the other hand, a concern about if the government in Israel is actually doing enough to protect the population. Could you tell our viewers how that has been evolving over the last few days and what you're seeing and hearing?
Well, Israelis are known for rallying around the flag in times of crisis. And certainly when it comes to going to war with Iran, war in Iran has been spoken about repeatedly for going on 30 years, perhaps even more. Iran is generally considered by the great majority of Israelis to be Israel's #1 enemy, responsible for funding and aiding and abetting even Hamas and certainly Hezbollah in Lebanon. So this general support for this war is quite large, and even those Israelis who regularly protest against Netanyahu and his government are in full support of this military action. On the other hand, there isn't a lot of trust when it comes to the Netanyahu government. Netanyahu is beleaguered by both personal and political troubles. He is considered to be somewhat in hoc to the settlers and the more hardcore right-wing parts of his government, but he's also generally thought to be quite busy with getting himself out of his own personal legal troubles. And the level of mistrust with regard to his government has brought most Israelis, again, not to denounce him, but to shift into a kind of a personal survival mode. There are still long lines stretching before many Israeli stores that sell everything from food to medicine. Israelis believe they need to take care of themselves at the moment. They have very few expectations of the government to take care of them.
Ori, is there a sense in Israel that there is any kind of actual end game when it comes to this conflict, or that there is an attainable end game when it comes to the political landscape in Israel? Are there any realistic conditions, or is there the perception that there are any realistic conditions under which Israel would consider operations against Iran to be complete in the days or weeks ahead?
That is the $64,000 question, and it is very much reminiscent of the situation in Gaza after October 7th, 2023. There is no visible endgame. Various potential demonstrations of victory or proofs of triumph have been spoken about in Israeli public discourse and by Israeli leadership, but they include too many options, most of them which are irreconcilable. There's been talk of decapitating the nuclear program. There's been talk about preventing Iran from moving to the next phase in its nuclear development. But there's also been talk of regime change. I think most Israelis are very excited by what is considered to be the relative ease with which Israel has established dominance in the skies over Iran. And at the moment, nobody's demanding any real kind of endgame from the government. But if life in Israel continues at the pace it has over the past 3 nights, where Israeli citizens simply don't sleep, I think we may begin to hear grumbling sooner rather than later. Once again, I have to remind you and our viewers, though, that these grumblings don't necessarily translate into a lack of support for the war. This is exactly the same as it was in Gaza when Israel set out to, quote unquote, destroy Hamas and return the hostages, neither of which was accomplished. Israelis basically support military action. They trust the military even when they don't trust the government. And so far, the military appears to be doing great things in Iran, and most Israelis are still vocally expressing their support.
Ori, we've seen these reports emerge out of Israel in the last several hours in which there are Israeli officials that are saying that the U.S. needs to support them in their effort against Iran. The Prime Minister, Benjamin Netanyahu, he's signaled an expectation of U.S. backing going forward. If Washington continues to withhold deeper military involvement, and we don't know whether that will be the case or not. There's been a lot of contradictory statements from Trump and people in his orbit. But what are the next military or political options for the Israeli government?
If Washington continues to withhold real involvement in Netanyahu's schemes, Israel doesn't have many options. Israel can only continue to do what it is doing now and escalate that. It can kill more senior leaders. It can bomb more targets because the Iranians are having difficulty putting up any kind of significant resistance. I don't see President Trump getting into this conflict. I think he is facing too much criticism at home, and I think he's very much aware of Israel's tendency, especially under Netanyahu, to begin with a loud bang but end with a whimper.
Ori, let me ask you, is there an expectation in Israel, as far as what you're hearing from members of the population there, is there an expectation that Israel would actually be able to take out all of the nuclear capability and programs in Iran going forward?
No, I think that's generally accepted that Israel can't do that. Simplistic explanations will say that Israel needs bunker breaking bombs that only the United States has. But I think generally among pundits, among politicians, even not, among people who are not necessarily in the know, just educated consumers of the media, it's generally accepted that Israel cannot end the Iranian nuclear program alone. In fact, the IDF has said as much. They've said we want to stop it, we want to slow it. We can't end it alone, just like we can't affect regime change. For politicians in Israel, it's much easier to talk about things like regime change and that absolute victory, that total victory that Prime Minister Netanyahu talked about in Gaza. Words in this sense are cheap, and politicians are not averse to using them with some volume.
Ori, when it comes to the type of warning systems that are being employed in Israel right now, could you walk our viewers through that? I know that earlier in the day you were talking about how it's a bit confusing. There's lots of different early warning and detection systems, and that the messages that are coming out from the authorities there can be a bit tricky for citizens in Israel. What is it? Walk us through. What is the kind of warnings you get, and what are you told to do, and what kind of precautions are you told to take?
Optimally, you get 4 warnings. The first 2 warnings don't necessitate active sheltering, but one warning says be around protected space, be prepared to go to a protected space. The next warning in terms of urgency says expect alarms, expect sirens in your area over the next few minutes. When you get that warning, you're supposed to go shelter. And then the specific warnings talk about where barrages are headed. But even today, we had a situation where our home front command skipped the first warning, and people who had gotten used very quickly to a 4-warning system assumed that the second warning was the first warning and reported not having enough time to reach protected areas or shelters. Generally, there's some confusion. It's a very elaborate system. When asked about this confusion today, the IDF said, these are all recommendations. We never officially committed to telling people exactly what to do. That, to me, as a well-known consumer of Israeli public utilities, says that confusion is beginning to seep in at the institutional level as well, not just at the ordinary citizen level.
Ori, I want to switch gears a little bit and just ask you about the G7 summit. The reason I want to ask you about that is because several hours ago we heard the Israeli President Isaac Herzog. He was calling for G7 countries to be involved in its war against Iran. Do you think that there are any signs that any of the participants of the G7 summit would actually consider that, or that we would hear statements about what's going on from the participants?
Statements we may hear, but I think consistently the participants of the G7 have been telling Israel that the only way they'll get directly involved is if their own national assets or their own nationals are compromised. And I believe this point has been made clear to Prime Minister Netanyahu. The fact that he continues, as does President Herzog, to beseech G7 countries to enter the fray, I think demonstrates Israel's growing awareness that it is alone in this, well, not all alone, but effectively alone in this. I think Israel really wanted, Netanyahu was very much counting on the world forgetting Gaza, forgetting its denunciations of Israeli policy, and jumping in to support and actively defend Israel. I think he has been, to some extent, unpleasantly surprised.
All right, Ori Goldberg joining us there from Tel Aviv. We appreciate your time. Thanks so much.
Thank you for having me.
All right, let's go back now to our correspondent, Bernard Smith, who's live for us in the Jordanian capital, Amman. Bernard, a lot of developments the past few hours. You've been witnessing a lot of it there. In Amman, what's the latest you're hearing about the most recent missile strike from Iran towards Israel?
Okay, so to update, we've had a second wave of missiles targeted at Israel from Iran. The Israeli Home Front Command gave the all clear at about now 45 minutes ago. It ended. It says that several areas across the country, search and rescue forces are operating in several locations across the country in which reports of projectiles were received, but it's now safe for the public to leave protected spaces. We've seen video in the last couple of hours or so from different locations in Israel, but particularly we've seen Haifa, the port city, a strategically important port city, which appears to have been hit or where missiles appear to have got through. There's a refinery there that seems to have been a target, or certainly the port city has been a target over the last couple of nights by Iranian missiles. Most of them seem to have been intercepted. Most of the missiles fired at Israel seem to have been intercepted by either Israel's military, some by the Jordanian military when they fly in Jordanian, when they go through Jordania airspace over me, or they get intercepted by the Iron Dome. But clearly from the vision, the pictures we're seeing, some are getting through. We don't know how many. The Israelis don't reveal how many, and we're just waiting for an update now, which will come in the next hours, early coming hours, I guess, over what happened in this last wave of Iranian missiles.
Bernard, if I could also just ask you, what kind of impact is this having on countries like Jordan? You're in Amman. There have been times that you have seen these volleys of missiles that have been launched and been intercepted. What kind of impact is this having on Jordan and the other countries that are sandwiched between Iran and Israel?
Yeah, they're all sandwiched. That's the word. Palestine, Lebanon, Jordan, Iraq, all stuck in between Israel and Iran, and really not able to do much to stop what's going on and to affect what's going on. Jordan particularly feeling a heavy economic impact by this. It's tourist season here, but with this going on, of course, the airports are emptying. Jordanian airspace is constantly either opening or closing, disrupting the airport, and no tourists, of course, are going to come here in current circumstances. Jordan's economy was already reeling in the aftermath of the Gaza war because, again, that put people off from coming to this region. So the Jordanians really struggling. And on a practical level, yes, most of those missiles are coming through Jordanian airspace. We get air raid warnings here, and we get all clear warnings here as well. And we do sometimes see some of the missiles, we saw it last night, being destroyed in the air over here, and there is practical risk of shrapnel falling as well. There's no shelters, particularly here. They don't have the setup as they do in Israel, but people are still warned to seek shelter, but you don't get much warning. It's really just a matter of a couple of minutes before you see the missiles flying over.
Bernard, so many moving parts to all this. Thanks so much for keeping us up to speed. That's our correspondent Bernard Smith live for us in Amman, Jordan. Thanks, Bernard. All right, let's go ahead and bring in Elijah Magnier. He's a military and political analyst. He joins us now live from Paris. Elijah, let me get your perspective on what's happening, all this escalation. Where do you see things going from here? Is there a point at which things calm down and can de-escalate, or is this only going to continue to get bigger?
Thank you for having me. I think it's going to continue escalating because we are just on the first days of the war that Israel declared on Iran. And also the Israeli officials, Prime Minister, the army, all warned the Israeli society that this war is going to be heavy and the price is going to be extremely high. But the society that all stands behind Benjamin Netanyahu and support the war in Iran did not expect this level of destruction because since 1973, Israel never waged a war on a country and never been attacked in this scale in the heart of Tel Aviv. So now they are realizing what the Palestinians have been suffering, what the Lebanese have been suffering, and they see the destruction in front of them, building in Tel Aviv, in Haifa, destroyed, fire everywhere, the properties no longer exist, the number of 8 people killed, 250 wounded in one day, that unheard of since a very long time in Israel. So all that is not something that the society was ready for. The officials are and were, but confronting the reality is something different. Now, Benjamin Netanyahu has objectives to meet. They destroy the nuclear capability of Iran, prevent Iran from enriching uranium, destroy the missile program, and eventually, if he can, by his Operation Rising Lion, to eat his prey, which means destroy the Islamic Republic and the ruling system. Now, of course, he will scale down his objectives when he sees this kind of destruction. And we have seen Iran waking up from the first shock and surprise of day one when Israel surprised the Iranians and killed many officers. But now we see everything back in control, and we see a very controlled bombing on different hours during the day different waves, different kind of missiles, and the overwhelming of the limit of the Iron Dome, David Slang, and all the layer of interception missile that Israel is using, extremely costly but not infinite.
Elijah, earlier there was a report that emerged that U.S. President Donald Trump had vetoed a plan that had been presented by the Israeli government to kill Iran's supreme leader. I want to get your perspective on this because Trump had also said that it's possible that the U.S. could get involved in the war. These seem to be contradictory messages. A lot of speculation about what the U.S. would or would not do going forward. What do you think as far as what role the U.S. may play going forward in this conflict?
What we hear from President Trump at the beginning is he was part of the ruse with Benjamin Netanyahu against Iran when he spoke on the day before the attack in the morning and in the afternoon that the meeting in Oman, Muscat, will be excellent, and he's very positive. And then he goes to bed and Iran is bombed. And in the morning, he gives a warning to the Iranians that they have to accept his terms before everything is going to be destroyed. So he had a full plan of the operation. Therefore, the Iranians are not going to believe him. Secondly, the Israelis will kill Sayyid Ali Khamenei if they can, because it makes huge difference to have the leader of the revolution, that is the head of the army, the head of the armed forces, the one who decides war and peace, and the one that direct the country what to do next and how far they can go in this war and when to negotiate. Therefore, creating the chaos in Iran is the favorite plan for Benjamin Netanyahu, in particular when he is seeing now how the society in Israel is not really going to bear this kind of bombardment every day. Therefore, what President Trump is saying is really not taken as a very credible source for the Iranians because of his contradictory message and because Iran believes that this war has been planned for a very long time. This is what Netanyahu confirmed. He has been looking for this war for the last 15 years, but he really thought about it only in November 2024 when he killed Sayyid Nasrallah, Hezbollah leader, and then he waited for Trump. And then Trump gave the ultimatum of 60 days. And on the 61st day,